Speaker today, the Reverend Michael Gienger, rhymes with finger. He serves as one of 3 co-pastors at Galveston Central Methodist Church. Michael spoke to us several months ago and inspired us all with his vision and the commitment of his group to serve the underserved and the unhoused community here in Galveston. He is married to his partner, Mariah Gienger, who is an occupational therapist working at UTMB. And most importantly, they love and care for a 12-year-old dog, Crouton. Michael?
Well, good morning, everybody. It's good to be with you this morning again. I just feel such a kindred spirit with you all, so thank you all for the invitation back to be with you all. You know, I was speaking at a church that I used to serve up in Clear Lake a couple weeks ago, and one of those congregants commented on my Facebook just to say thank you, I think. And what they tried to write was, Michael, you never cease to amaze us. But what he wrote, because of autocorrect, said, Michael, you never seem to amaze us. And so I just want to set the expectations this morning of we'll see what happens. So yeah, what a gift to be with you all. Last time I was here, I got to kind of introduce Central to you all and our work in the community, working with Galveston's homeless population and trying to create a love and a curiosity that welcomes everyone in. And we've been trying to do that together for the last couple of years now. And so I thought today, with this theme of embracing possibility for the month of July, it would be a perfect opportunity to talk at least about some of the underlying kind of theological convictions that we have that empower us to do the work that we're doing and help us see people a little bit differently than maybe society or the world or culture wants us to see folks. So that's kind of what we'll be doing today. And a big thanks to Jay and Judy for making our my slides happen this morning. I think they'll be up there. So we're going to be starting in the book of Genesis, chapter 28. I come from a Christian United Methodist background, so feel free during any of this to just replace words with love or community or transcendent power. Whatever works for you is good with me. So in Genesis 28, there's this man named Jacob, and he is on the move, and he comes to this place, and starting in verse 10, I think this will be up on the screen, it says this. It says, Jacob left Beersheba and set out for Haran. He reached a certain place, and I want us to hang on to this idea of a certain place this morning. He reached a certain place and spent the night there. When the sun had set, he took one of the stones at that place and put it near his head. Then he lay down there. He dreamed and saw a raised staircase, its foundation on the earth and its top touching the sky. And God's messengers were ascending and descending on it. And suddenly the Lord was standing on it and saying, I am the Lord your God, the Lord of the God of your father Abraham and the God of Isaac. I will give you and your descendants the land on which you are lying. Your descendants will become like dust of the earth. You will spread out to the west, the east, the north, and the south. Every family of earth will be blessed because of you and your descendants. I'm with you now. I will protect you everywhere you go, and I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done everything that I have promised you. When Jacob woke from his sleep, he thought to himself, the Lord is definitely in this place, but I didn't know it. Now, I've had some weird dreams. I don't know if you have too, but in Jacob's dream, God is like, look, I got some things for you to do. I've got a calling on your life. I have some work that I want you to do. This is what I want to do through you. And Jacob wakes up from this pillow made of rocks and says, whoa, God was here the whole time, and I had no idea. He wakes up to this God who's been present all along. His statement isn't, hey, God just showed up. His statement is, whoa, I woke up and God's been here the whole time. One of my favorite things that happens at the Central community is when we get to help people move into housing for the very first time after living on the streets. And there's no better moment than getting the keys to their new apartment when they've been living on the streets or couch surfing, surviving for months or years. Last Christmas, we were able to help one of our friends move into their new apartment. I think we have a photo of Steve decorating his Christmas tree. And an apartment, of course, is just wood and sheetrock and carpet. And, you know, I started thinking about where this person, Steve, had been before. I started thinking about how this person had been making it through such difficult circumstances. And then I started thinking about the new memories that were going to be shared in this house, friends and dinners and conversations and restful nights. And I start having this bonding experience with this apartment that isn't even mine, right? Has anybody ever had something like this with an inanimate object? Yeah. There is this increasing awareness of just how wonderful this apartment is. And as we're unloading boxes, I'm just thanking God out loud for taking care of my friends' needs. And I'm having this moment of awareness that God has been providing for my friend all along, even when things seemed really hard and really difficult. And I'm sure the landlord was like, what the hell is going on? As I'm having this bonding moment with this apartment, and I'm standing in the parking lot just saying, I love you, apartment, right? It became like a sacred, holy moment. God, you're taking care of me. You're like taking care of me. Even something as basic as an efficiency 1-bedroom apartment, like you've been taking care of us. You know what we need. Jacob says, I woke up and realized that God had been here all along and I was asleep. And so Jacob wakes from his sleep, but he really wakes from his sleep, if you know what I'm saying. Yeah. And he becomes aware of a God who's been there the whole time. God was in this place and I just missed it. Sometimes you'll hear people say, yeah, there's Steve in his apartment decorating his Christmas tree. Sometimes you'll hear people say things like, and then God showed up. Have you heard people say this phrase before? And then God showed up, to which I'm now realizing, no, I think you did. I think you showed up. They're like, all of a sudden, God just came. No, I think all of a sudden you became aware of the God who's been here all along. Jacob woke up and said, God is in this place, and I wasn't aware of it. I want to look at another story from Exodus chapter 3. Let's notice what happens to this man named Moses, because I think there's a level of frustration that I can relate to with this Moses character. In Exodus 3, there's this man named Moses, and he ends up in this land called Midian, which is just like rocks and dirt for miles and miles and miles. And in Exodus 3, there is this bush that's on fire. And Moses goes over to the bush, and in verse 3 says this, Moses said to himself, let me check out this amazing sight and find out why this bush isn't burning up. When the Lord saw that he was coming to look, God called to him out of the bush, Moses, Moses. Moses said, I'm here. Then the Lord said, don't come any closer. Take off your sandals because you are standing on holy ground. Many years later, there's this man named Stephen. This is from the book of Acts, and he says that Moses fled from Egypt to Midian, and the bush happened some 40 years later after he fled. So later in the book of Acts, he says, Moses was in Midian for 40 years. He was a shepherd in this land for 40 years. And then one day, God speaks to him and tells him to take off his sandals because he's standing on holy ground. Now, if he's been there for 40 years, and this is just purely conjecture, but for how many years has he perhaps been walking past that bush? Like 40? Like 40 years walking by? Like, was God speaking to him the entire time? But he only heard it when he stopped? Was the ground like all of a sudden holy, or was the ground holy for all 40 of those years? And it took that long for Moses to stand still long enough to begin to realize it. Is the ground that you walk on only holy during certain moments, or has God been present there the whole time? And what happens is you begin to wake up to levels of depth and understanding, to holiness and sanctity that's been there since the beginning of everything. We were just asleep, and we wake up and we have this moment. God's been in this place the whole time, and I missed it. Moses, take off your sandals because you're standing on holy ground. It's not as if God shows up. It's us showing up and becoming aware of this God who's been present the whole time. Now, Jesus, I think, lives into this in some really unique ways. And I believe Jesus has some fundamental assumptions about how the universe works. So I want to look at something that Jesus says in John chapter 5. And I think he gives some insight into this. I want to spend some time just meditating on this phrase that he uses. John 5:17, Jesus says this. He says, my Father is still working, and I am working too. Another translation says, my Father is always at his work to this very day, and I too am working. Now, at this point in Jewish history, when Jesus is walking and talking and feeding and healing people, they believed that the prophets had stopped speaking. Like Malachi had said his bit, and we're done. There was this general belief that at some point the prophets had stopped speaking. God was done speaking through people directly, and the Romans were pretty much in control of things at this point. So for some reason, God had abandoned these people's hopes of being free. So there was this whole sense, culturally, religiously, that God had sort of given up. And Jesus says, my Father is still working. God hasn't stopped working. It's not like God did some big stuff and now is just resting. My Father is still working, Jesus says. Let's take a minute with that phrase. I think this is an assumption about the way the world works, the way the universe works at school, at work, on the streets, buying things, going places, interacting. Jesus' assumption is that God is at work. His assumption is that God is doing something here. It's not like God is over there and has just abandoned this place, though it feels like it, like we heard in our concerns this morning, right? Because God finds it boring or lame or something like that. No. God's at work is Jesus' assumption. And so one of the things that we're asking in my community at Central is like, how far can we push this idea? Like, how far can we take this idea that God is still at work? I mean, every relationship, every interaction, every place, every person, every mess, every time God's at work somewhere. God is working. God's always doing something. Very busy. God is very busy. What if we began to internalize a message like this? So you meet up with somebody and you're like, I just cannot stand this person, right? At Central we call these folks EGR, extra grace required, okay? But if God is apparently at work all of the time, even in this interaction with this person, God is at work doing something, has to be doing something, has to be pursuing, has to be trying to get through, has to be trying to wake us up, because God's doing that with me. And so God must be doing that with this other person. I mean, what would happen if we began to internalize a message like this? Because this is Jesus' assumption. This is the assumption of many of the great faith traditions, that God is at work somewhere, and we are becoming more and more and more awake and attuned to that work. Now, here, you, me, at work, convicting us. I mean, maybe it's the ways that we're living. Maybe they are destructive and they aren't good. They aren't great. They aren't the best, and we know it. They aren't bringing us a sense of peace. It says that God is continually at work, prodding us, speaking to us, pushing us, tapping us on the shoulder. What are you doing? What are you doing, right? Reminding us that we're loved, or maybe telling us for the very first time that you're loved, you're accepted, you're loved. The writer Anne Lamott talks about her whole life knowing that there was somebody out there speaking, saying to her, you're not alone. You're loved. You're loved. She says, my whole life, I knew it was there. I finally just turned and woke up to it. You are loved, friends. Still at work. Right now. Right here, with you, doing something, calling something, reminding you of your holy purpose, speaking into you the value of people in your life and the relationships in your life. And whatever you do, don't let those things fall apart. Why? Because God is at work. And I think this has profound implications for what it means to be a part of a community of faith, or what it means to go to church or to a UU fellowship more specifically. There's this writer named John Robinson who has a book called Honest to God, which is just the best title for a book. And he says this in the book. He says, the purpose of worship, and for worship you could substitute going to church, gathering as a fellowship, whatever. The purpose of worship is not to escape from this world into the other world, but to open oneself to meeting God in the common. Right? The purpose of church isn't that you leave the real world and come to some sort of insulated, fake, plastic world where you talk about things that don't really matter. Like, no. The purpose is that you would open yourself up to the presence of God everywhere. I mean, maybe you could say this: the point of church, the point of a UU fellowship, isn't to meet God. Although we often do meet God as a community in really unique ways. I mean, church isn't the place where you go to meet God. I tell people at Central all the time, church is a gathering where you're learning and being transformed into the kind of person who's able to see God everywhere else. Does this make sense? We're tracking on this? Yeah. It's not an escape from real life into this bubble, and then we go back. It's learning and being woken to the God who is present everywhere. John Robinson goes on to say this. He says, the function of worship is to make us more sensitive to these depths. Anything that fails to do this is not worship, be it ever so religious. He says you can have all the songs you want, right? You can have all the nice messages. You can dress up on Sunday mornings. You can have all that. And if you're not being woken up and opened up to the presence of God everywhere, then it's not worship. No matter how worshipy it claims to be, it's an awareness. If this community, the UU, if my community, Central, if what goes on here at Sundays isn't opening you up to the God who is present everywhere, to the mystery in the mundane, the sacred in the secular, then I and we have failed, friends. He says it's not worship. Despite whatever we claim, if it becomes, well, you go here because God is here and God isn't somewhere else, that's just another religious system, and frankly, I'm not interested in anything to do with that. It becomes the opening up to the divine who's in the depths of every moment, every person, and every place. My Father is still working, Jesus says, always doing something. Every interaction, every phone call, always at work. He's always at work. Last idea for us this morning, going back to that Genesis 28. I told us we would come back to this. It says Jacob reached a certain place and spent the night there. That's what the Genesis text says, a certain place. He just stopped somewhere randomly in the middle, right? Just anywhere, a certain place. It's a Hebrew way of saying in the middle of nowhere and nowhere, okay? So he just stops, takes a rock, makes a pillow, and lays down. And in this certain place, it's not a temple, it's not a tabernacle, it's not a Christian bookstore. Are we preaching yet? Okay, no. It's not an event that's sponsored by a church. No, it's just some place. It's a bunch of rocks out in the middle of the wilderness. And he wakes up like God has been here the whole time, and I just wasn't aware of it. It's any old place, but God was here the whole time. And I'm waking up because I wasn't aware of it. Friends, this means it's a certain cubicle, a certain hallway, a certain driveway, a certain street, a certain store, a certain checkout lane, a certain relationship, a certain phone call, a certain email, a certain place. It could be anywhere. It could be anywhere. The earth is God's and everything in it. God's everywhere. One writer even says, everywhere I go, God's there. I can't get away. That's my translation, at least. And so for the people of Central, what this has come to mean for us, we'll go to the next slide. It means a certain dormitory. Just right up the street from you guys, we have recently purchased a dorm from UTMB that we're very excited about. It's got 18 units in it. And we're going to turn this into transitional housing for people coming off of the streets where they can stay for up to 2 years and either go back to work or back to school or get access to government assistance to be able to live full lives. I'm so proud of the people of Central who are discovering possibility, embracing possibility, and have changed their eyes to see not a dorm, but a place where people can be transformed. Just a certain dorm, an ordinary place where God was and we had no idea. And so we're so excited about what this is going to mean for us going forward. It's 2 blocks from you guys, so I'm hoping that we can partner and think of some really creative ways to do things together. It's a certain dorm, an ordinary place. God was here and we had no idea, right in our backyard. See, here's what happens. We see things on social media of people doing like amazing things in other places, right? If only I could be a part of that group or that church, right? And we start to think, ugh, I'm missing it, right? It's over there. Look at all the great things that they're doing. It's easy to believe that if you go somewhere, then the radical stuff will begin to happen. But the challenge, I think, for us is to discover who we are, like right here, right now. Like, do you know anybody who's ever like, I hear this a lot, like, oh, this town doesn't have any, like, this town is lame, this town is stinks, like, I'm moving to Houston, right? And then they move to Houston, and you see them a couple months later, and they're like, oh, Houston, nothing's going on here. And you think to yourself, here's an observation. Lameness seems to follow you everywhere you go, right? Yeah, from town to town. Those of you who are in the recovery movement, like there's this beautiful phrase that comes from recovery, wherever you go, there you are. There you are. If you're not experiencing, like if I'm not learning how to be a loving, gracious person right here, like what's magically going to change over there, right? Because wherever you go, there you are. And so what happens when you're waking up is you begin to realize that my heart is being transformed. And that difficult person that I will face tomorrow, that EGR person, I'm learning how not to be unkind to them tomorrow. Like I'm taking steps to, maybe it's just being neutral to them, right? To move, and maybe that neutrality can move into a gesture of kindness every now and then under the appropriate circumstances, which might actually lead to like a twinge of compassion and care and love for them. I mean, what's happening is the revolution is alive and well in those moments within you. And when it's alive and well within you, it cannot be kept in. Love has to spill over. See, when you're becoming aware of the holy and the sacred within the mundane and the everyday, when that's happening, the revolution is alive and well within you. I hope we're tracking on this. Everyday, ordinary places like dormitories and UU fellowships and central churches, they take on new and profound significance and importance. Authentic spirituality lives this with this awareness that God is near, friends. God is near. Not somewhere else, not in that building, not exclusively with that group of people or that religious system. It's near. It's near. It's like you, right now, speaking, being convicted. So this morning, are there any areas in which your soul is troubled this morning? Like you're anxious. You just showed up this morning like wound up unbelievably tight. And the voice of God wants to say to you this morning, relax. Relax. I run the universe, not you. Okay? So I'm near. I saw whatever it is. I'm with you. I'm with you. Or maybe you have some relationship that's fractured this morning. It's going south. And God is near, saying to you, trust me. Just do the right thing. Trust me. I'm near this morning. I'm in your midst. Can we close our eyes for just a moment and reflect, meditate, pray? Spirit, this morning, wake us up. And keep waking us up. We ask you to show us just how loaded places and people and relationships and work are. Give us like a radar to see what we've missed. Give us eyes to see what's been in front of us all along. Maybe it's somebody who we haven't been valuing, and yet they're sacred, they're holy, they're a part of your creation. You made them, and we missed it, and we need to wake up. Or maybe there's this sense, Spirit, in which our life doesn't matter, and yet we trust and have great faith that we do matter. So speak to us. Let it be. Amen. Thank you, friends.